Welcome to Healthy University, where we'll discuss issues and subjects on how you can live a healthier and more productive life. And now, here's your host for Healthy University, Alan Eisenberg.
Hi, and welcome to a very special episode of Healthy U. This is your host, Alan Eisenberg, and I don't have a guest today. I wanted to talk about bullying and school shooting. There was a recent shooting in Florida, which again involved a youth bringing a weapon to school and killing 17 teachers and students in a mass shooting. And there's a lot of controversy around these things all the time. And what we find in many of the cases is that bullying plays a part. That's not to say that every incident of school shootings has bullying as a component, but in quite a few of them, we're finding that they do. For example, Columbine, when that happened, after a lengthy research behind what happened, and David Cullum wrote a brilliant book about it if you want to read about some of the research and some of the findings. Bullying really wasn't the big factor in that shooting. That said, as the interviewers interviewed the students and as people did the research, bullying was a major problem at the school. And Eric Klebold and Dylan, who did the shooting, it was found that there were some bullying in their past, or ignoring really, but also that there was a mental health issue involved. And this is really something we haven't been talking about in the right way. We certainly know that mental health and the school shootings seem to be connected, and that there's great controversy behind the people that want to see guns taken away or reduced in this country, the United States, and the other advocates who are talking about mental health. I'm very sensitive to this subject because I went to Virginia Tech, and when the Virginia Tech shooting happened, I did a lot of research behind it, and I knew some of the people involved in it. And bullying was definitely a component in the shooting of the 30 plus people that were killed on the campus in that situation. The person in question who committed the shooting at Virginia Tech was known to have been bullied in high school, ignored, made fun of, definitely had signs of mental health issues in a paper he wrote to one of the professors in the class. And of course, the thing that always gets to me is that professor was so shocked by the paper that was written by this person that they took it to the dean, and they decided they couldn't do anything about it because the person was an adult and they couldn't deal with a mental health issue with an adult. Now, I have a problem in many ways about that. And I'll tell you what the problem is. I went to college, or imagine high school. What would it take to write a paper that a professor or teacher found so disturbing that they would take it to someone else? I can't think of anything I wrote that would have done that. But that's me, and I would think that, if a professor or teacher noticed this person writing very violent information, which is what we find is there's a lot of wanting to be the last person on earth type feelings, or a megalomaniacal type feeling that these people get. And how does that really tie to the bullying issue? Well, the studies have shown that bullied youth are 2 times more likely to bring a weapon and a gun to school. So why is that happening? Well, I can tell you why it happens, because I was one of those people that brought a weapon to school when I was 12 years old. and which is why I do the bullying recovery work, because it's not just about the victims. This will affect the whole community. Obviously, if a victim is bullied and they go into the school with a weapon and they use it, that's going to affect the whole community, as we see in Florida right now. So it's not just the victim. It's not a victimless crime. It's not really something that we want to blame on guns. There are many levels to the problem. Yes, guns are easy to get. That is a problem in this country. And we have seen statistical studies that show when you reduce the ease in which someone can get a gun and what guns can be gotten, such as what we see in most of these shootings are AR-15s versus, let's say, a handgun. That's where we may have an issue where we want to talk about guns. But I'm not in any way saying the gun is the problem. That's like saying a car is a problem. And what I mean by that is that if you think about it, the car is a weapon as well, but it has to be weaponized. And a car sitting in a parking lot with nobody in it is not weaponized. Weaponizing it is to put someone behind the wheel of it who wants to commit a violent act with the car or with the truck. And we've seen this. You know, we see this in terrorism today. We saw it with airplanes flying at 9/11. So weaponizing a product is the issue. Now, a gun, of course, is something that you would typically weaponize. And what do I mean by that? Well, a gun bought off the shelf is like a car with nobody in it. There are no bullets in it. There is nothing to fire. That all has to be purchased separately, loaded by somebody, and then utilized. And at that point, it's weaponized, right? So there really isn't that difference between, saying, a car plowing into a bunch of people like we see today and someone buying a gun and loading it full of bullets. And then when we talk about semi-automatic guns, the semi-automatic rifles that we see the people getting, that's like the difference between having a small car and having a truck. And what we see, of course, with terrorism is the trucks. So I want to kind of clarify at least my opinion on that it's a very difficult argument because many things can be weaponized that we have. Guns, knives, household items, cars, airplanes, helicopters, almost all of these things can be weaponized, but they don't start out as a weapon. Sure, a gun is purchased in order to buy bullets to fire the gun. That is the purpose of it, but it is not a weapon in and of itself until it is weaponized. So it's not an easy debate, and I'm not trying to say that people who want guns off the street are wrong. I certainly have thoughts around it, and I'm not necessarily a fan of anyone getting their hands on a gun that can shoot multiple rounds. I think that Australia actually in 1996 had a incident at a school, and they took all the kinds of guns that can fire multiple rounds away, and they haven't had another mass shooting incident since 1996. So in terms of proof, we see that that's the case. But of course we have the Second Amendment, and we have many people in this country who see things like guns as a right, as a civil right. And I think we just have to kind of clarify a couple of things around that. But let me jump to the other side of the story. The majority of time when we hear about a mass shooting or when we see a mass shooting, the bigger part that's involved is the person who is committing the shooting and their mental health state. Mental health is an issue that we are just not solving. We're not working hard enough, and we're not doing enough to help people to recover or to deal with mental health issues. We live in a very stressful society today. Bullying in and of itself is very stressful to deal with. And when we see these mass shootings, and we hear about some of the things that these shooters have written, where they typically will rant. We see the dissolvement of the regular person into someone with a mental health condition, whether that condition is PTSD or a serious belief that they are in threat, their fight or flight or freeze has been broken by attacks on them via bullying. Then we have to get closer to understanding their rationale. It doesn't mean we accept the rationale, by the way. It just means we understand it. And I do, because I was there. I was there bringing a weapon to school when I was 12, because after 6 years of constant bullying, I wanted to protect myself. I felt threatened every moment of every day. And I think it's important that I give this message through Healthy You today, because I can understand how a person can be brought to that level, because I'm not a violent person. In fact, I'm probably, if you met me, a person who believes in peaceful coexistence and doesn't understand the violence we see today. But that said, I want to take a break here, and when I come back, I'll tell you more of my story of the weapon and using it and what happened next. So stay with us through the commercial break, and we'll be back with this special edition of Healthy You.
You're listening to Healthy University with Alan Eisenberg.
So welcome back to Healthy You. This is Alan Eisenberg, certified life coach and the host of Healthy You. And we're talking about school shootings and school violence. And it's around what has recently happened, but what's been happening many times in this country. It's not just once, and it's not just schools. We saw it in Las Vegas. We see many cases of it. So I was going to share my personal story of how bullying and school shootings take place. So when I was 6, we moved to a new place, and I was a very confident, I would say, child when we moved, and I really didn't deal with much bullying. I don't think many young kids 6 years old do yet. But in about second grade, I started to get bullied, and much of it was because I'm highly sensitive and I could be affected by the bullies, and they affected me. I admit to that, and I've written about it in my memoir, A Ladder in the Dark. And I wrote about this incident as well because I think it's important to understand that for the next 6 years I was relentlessly bullied. I was picked on. I was threatened for my life. I was ignored by adults, and there was a belief that I just had to suck it up and deal with it. It's probably some of the worst things you can say to a child who's being bullied. Suck it up, or why can't you just act different so the bullies don't bother you? I've heard this many times. The reason I can't act different, the reason other children can't act different, is because they are who they are. And if they start to act different, then these kinds of things that I'm about to tell you will happen. So after 6 years of relentless bullying, I decided I was going to act different. I was going to go against my personal beliefs And I felt so threatened that I took one of my mother's files, a metal file, not a gun, not a knife, but I took it and carried it in my pocket. And I still remember, you know, putting my hand in my pocket and touching it and feeling the safety of having a weapon, knowing if somebody threatened me, I had it with me. So I was being threatened at the time by a friend who turned on me and became a bully. He was much bigger than me, as I recall, or at least, again, from my child's eyes of 12 years old, that's what I saw. And I didn't want to fight him. And I did many things to avoid this confrontation. So I told people I had the weapon. I told people he knew I had it. I told them that I would use it. I would take an alternate route home because I was a walker so that he wouldn't see me on the path that I was taking. And I really didn't want to go there, but at this point I was being who I thought others wanted me to be. I was no longer being my, what we call our authentic self. And I was broken. My mind had pretty much decided that things were not going right for me, and I needed to act differently, as these adults had told me along the way. But inside, I couldn't be any different. I was who I was. But I certainly acted different. I put on what I call a mask, and that's what we see happens. We put on these masks, we start fighting ourselves, having internal battles with ourselves, and doing things that we normally wouldn't in order to try to please or gain acceptance from people around us, that so that we can at least have a friend or feel like we have a friend. And I certainly did that. But one day I was taking this alternate path home, and this particular boy who had threatened to kill me, who I did not want to fight, who was an old friend of mine who was no longer a friend, found out about my new path home. And as I came up, I would have to crest a hill, and I was cresting the hill, and I saw him at the top. And I was stuck. And, he was shouting obscenities at me, threatening me. I was having panic and anxiety, as you can imagine. And at the end of the day, he approached me. I reached in my pocket where the file was. As he came to swing at me, I took the file and I stabbed him in the side. This shocked him and gave me enough time to start running, which I did. I had about a 1 mile run home, and I, at the time of 12, ran a mile home. He did not give up, though. He kept after me. I think there was a shock of being stabbed by the file, but that wasn't what a file isn't going to do a lot of damage. It probably more gave him a slice than a stab. And he ran all the way home, all the way to my house. Luckily, my grandmother was at my house. She opened the door as I yelled, running up my driveway to open the door. She did. I got in the door, and then he was there yelling and screaming obscenities, saying how I stabbed him, and my grandmother told him to leave, and he did. And here's the sad part, right? Because I did that, because I used a weapon, I was now a pariah at the school. Like, people would leave me alone. They knew, it got around pretty quick what I did, and they knew I was carrying a weapon, and so that all of a sudden led to being left alone, even by some of my good friends at the time, which did not put me in a better place. So it's really was the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But that's what I did, and that's something that I would say still feel now, 38 years later, haunted by. That I got to that level, was at that level of damage in my psyche, that I was willing to use a weapon. And I think if I had not moved that following summer, I really question what would have happened to me. Would I have graduated to something else? Would I have had to have dealt with more mental health issues, which I still had to deal with later in life. But we did move, and I did still not be my authentic self when we moved, knowing what that would cause. And I spent many years in great pain not being me. And that might sound funny, but that's really what it is you're not being you. So more recently, as I've continued my work in bullying recovery, and this is why I call it recovery, because we have to recover the damage that's done. Because here's the other problem. My second book I wrote was Crossing the Line, and the line is what I call the thin line, a very thin line between the two extremes that happen in bullying. And on one side is bullycide or suicide because of bullying, and we're much more aware of that now because children as young as 6 years old talk about online before taking their life the bullying that happened to them that's caused them to take this drastic action. But the other drastic action that someone can choose, again in this thin line, on the lower part of the line is bullycide, and on the higher part of the line is bringing a weapon to school and using it. And why do I say those are the same, close to the same thing? Why is the line so thin? Well, it's a matter of personality, right? And choice. Some kids choose to take their own life, and others choose to try to protect themselves or get revenge. And the problem is, we're going if a child commits suicide due to bullying, we're going to be very sad and have this great anguish about it. But the child who goes into school with the weapon and uses it, we demonize, and they're evil, and if they don't take their own life, which they typically do also, they end up in jail the rest of their lives many times. But the mental health aspect is still the same problem. We're still not addressing what is really at the heart of the issue, which is the mental health issue. And I think that that's the important part that we have to remember, is that mental health is a big part of this conversation. And we're not having that conversation. We're talking about getting guns off the street, all of these other things. But as I said, a gun has to be weaponized. So who's going to choose to weaponize it? People that don't have any value of life, gang members who are, again, not getting the love they need, typically at home, so they're getting it through their gangs. And then these bully victims who are broken or have complex post-traumatic stress disorder or other feelings of consistent and constant threat. And that's not very explainable if you've never had it. I always say the same thing. It's like when you watch some of these shows about murder or even the school shootings, and you go, that's unbelievable. How could someone do something like that? Well, unless you were ever in that spot to know what that feels like, I'm not sure that you really could. I don't think we're supposed to understand why people do things. It's like terrorism. Why would a terrorist fly planes into the World Trade Center and kill 3,000 people? I'm not meant to understand that, because I would never do anything like that. And there's special groups of people who try to understand these things, who try to get in the minds of these people. Well, I can tell you, in the mind of a bully victim, what we're dealing with is someone who is broken. Who they were and what their faith and beliefs and moral systems are get broken. And they get broken because of the way that they are treated, both by the bullies and by the community around them. And I'm not blaming schools. I'm not blaming parents. I'm not blaming people. I think we just have to start to open up that conversation. We have to start having some awareness, because people with mental disabilities, mental illness, they don't just walk around and you can't tell. There's telltale signs all over the place, particularly online, particularly in how they're acting at school or at home. If there's anger, if there's depression, if there's anxiety, if they don't want to go to school. We know all these things are real. We know that they don't, a student who was getting A's and B's is now getting C's, D's, and F's. And we're not questioning these things. So I really wanted to have this conversation today and do it solo because, again, I've studied it. There's plenty of great information out there if you want to learn more about the issue of bullying and school shootings. And I think it's an important part of the conversation. We always tend to take drastic action when things happen without really thinking what is the middle ground we need to get to. How are we going to resolve this issue? And I think if we stop and we think about resolution, okay, recovery of the victim or the shooter, recovery of the bullies, mental health aspects that work, and really trying to get a better educational focus around the issue, I think will go a long way to starting to resolve some of this. I don't know that we can ever solve it. I don't know that we can stop shootings from happening. But I know that we're not doing all the right things we need to. We tend to either focus one way or the other. It's either, gun issue or it's mental health. Or if it's both, how are you going to resolve that? How do you keep guns out of people with mental health illnesses that shouldn't have these weapons? And is it everybody? So, having been there, I just wanted to share this with you today. I hope that it brings some answers or at least some questions to you that you start to question, because if you met me on the street, you wouldn't think that I ever did anything like I did when I was 12. You wouldn't think I would ever be taken to a point where that would happen. But I was, and I did. And when I see school shootings and when I hear about shootings due to it being a victim who was bullied, I do have some understanding of that. I do have some empathic feelings about that. And it's not to say it's right. I'm not condoning the behavior, and I'm not saying, well, because I did it, others should do it. I think we need to solve it. And again, I don't have the answer to solve it. I can only tell you we're not looking in the right direction, in my opinion. This is Alan Eisenberg. I'm glad you joined me for this discussion, which was really more an opinion than a discussion, I guess, since I was the only one giving it. But I hope it brings up questions in your mind about why we see these school shootings and how we might handle them differently in the future and start to develop solutions around recovery and mental health illness research. And also think about, how they're getting the guns and what guns they're getting. And I do think that's a part of the conversation as well. But thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Healthy You.
Thank you for listening to Healthy University, brought to you by Bullying Recovery, LLC. This podcast does not replace the need for medical advice, professional diagnosis, opinion, treatment, or services to you or any other individual. The information provided here or through linkages to other sites is not a substitute for medical or professional care, and you should not use the information in place of a visit, call, consultation, or the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. Join us next time for more Healthy University.